No one's going to fix up a house or renovate it like you when you live there. Like when you're living in it, you're going to put all the little touches because you're actually living in the house. You realize like, we could use this here. The pool would be better this way. And we really make them like top notch.
The majority of people trade time for money in the hopes of building wealth. I'm here to tell you that the traditional methods don't cut it anymore. Welcome to the Passive Income Power Podcast. My name is Doug Earthman. My partner Mickey Bernstein and I are going to dive deep into the power that passive income can have on your quality of life. We're going to discuss alternative assets, strategies, and insights through interviews with the very people who have found freedom through their power. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Passive Income Power Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Passive Income Power Podcast. My name is Doug Earthman.
And I'm Mickey Bernstein.
And we've got Brandon Buck with Buck Realty on today's episode to give us 3 ways to start earning Airbnb income now. Brandon, Mickey, and I have a long history that we'll get into shortly, but he's also achieved a whole lot in the single family and vacation rental space. His success and growth is actually what inspired me to venture into real estate a few years back. Saw how he was doing and really made me start looking heavily into it. So I have a lot of gratitude for Brandon in that space, and I'll let him introduce himself and give a little more information about what he does.
Appreciate that, Doug. I didn't actually know that, so appreciate the kind words, and thanks for having me on. So yes, I'm Brandon Buck. I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and my full-time day job is medical sales, and that day job took me down to Tampa about 10 years ago, and that's when I started my, we'll call it a real estate journey, I guess, and it's been ramping up ever since.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you coming on today. Tell us a little bit about, well, first let me touch on how we all know each other, because that's a fun story. So, Brandon, your sister is my wife. And Mickey, tell everyone how you know Brandon.
And Brandon's brother is married to my youngest daughter.
So we are all connected somehow, not by blood, but all family through marriage, which is pretty unique because we all share a very similar passion for real estate.
So I like to think we have a connection. One of our biggest connections is that we, even in this world where the economy is uncertain and things are going crazy with inflation and the banks, the three of us always seem to find opportunity when other people see difficulty.
That's absolutely correct. Well, Brandon, tell us a little bit about your journey. When did you buy your first house? You were working in Memphis. You mentioned that you moved to Tampa for a job, and now you own 10 houses and more.
Yeah, so I never really intended to get into real estate. It wasn't really on purpose. I worked in Memphis, and as I said, my medical sales job brought me down to Tampa, and I put my house for sale, honestly, and it didn't sell for like 6 months, so I was still paying the mortgage. And I just said, you know what, let me put it on Facebook. Honestly, is what I did. I put it on Facebook to rent, and that's where it all started. It's funny. But it ended up being a friend of a friend that rented it out, and coincidentally, they ended up staying in the house for like 7 years. But when I was in Tampa, it just kind of clicked. It was like, okay, this is an easy way to get some extra revenue. So I bought a townhouse in Tampa that was really just my second purchase ever. And my realtor was like, we got this for a great price. We could turn around and sell this thing right now and make a good profit. And I said, I just moved here. I just moved from an apartment in here. It was really discouraging thinking about moving again. I said, I tell you what, if we list it for rent and it rents for the right price, I'll move out and we'll try and get another one. And we listed it for kind of a price that we thought was was way too high, but we had like 10 showings lined up the first weekend. So I said, all right, I guess I better get ready to move. And so those are the first two that kind of happened on accident. I started doing it again intentionally after that. I realized, okay, there's a market here for kind of higher end rentals, furnished rentals. I didn't mention that all of them are furnished. So then just started doing it.
Your long-term rentals they're furnished?
Yeah, typically, I would say probably about 80% of them are. There's only a few that we bought as an investment that we were able to rent so fast that we didn't take the time to furnish them. But that's something we get into later, but that's something that gives you the flexibility to go between like a long-term and Airbnb. Is your house is pretty much turnkey when you've set it up that way. So it lets you bounce back and forth. So yeah, maybe 80% of them, which could be a negative.
Is that typical in the Tampa market, or because I feel like the short-term rentals we see, the long-term rentals that you typically see, you're moving your own furniture in and out.
Yeah. Well, it's like any other market. I think a furnished rental is going to turn a lot of people away that have a lot of furniture. But there's a lot of people that are moving here that are building a new house or haven't moved their stuff down, that are looking to move in like tomorrow. And your house may sit for a few weeks, but then someone wants to move in that day. So it's a different clientele, but there's still a big market for that.
So you have 10 houses and number 11 on the way. That's not easy. I know I have rental property too, and it didn't just miraculously happen overnight. How did you learn about how to do this business, and did you have mentors or read books, or how did you figure it out?
Well, at first it was just kind of, learning by fire. Like I mentioned earlier, it was a little bit of an accident, so I wouldn't recommend that for anybody starting out. There's so much. So you asked about how any mentors or if I read any books. You can learn so much from podcasts and YouTube and so much stuff for free. I just dove in like head first, like anyone else. I have my day job. I like it. Real estate, I love it. So anytime I'm in between calls and I've got a long ride home, an hour ride from, say, Sarasota, I can knock out, a couple chapters of a book that I'm reading or a podcast. And when I get home, it's, just going down a rabbit hole of YouTube. I'm sure we all know how that can be, but there's so much information. And I really wish I would have started earlier, but a lot of it I just learned the hard way by making mistakes. And then as I got maybe halfway to where I am now, I started actively trying to learn more, and especially in the Airbnb space, because there's so many people doing it. There's so many like mentors out there that are free. Even on YouTube, there's ones you get paid for that will hold your hand the whole way through. But if I could go back, I would have started a lot earlier. But it's worked out. I just would have gotten here a little bit quicker.
Let's circle back now that I remembered where you were. You're starting to talk about how you grew your portfolio from the townhome that you had just moved into and furnished and started renting out, and then how did that lead into 10 houses?
Well, it wasn't overnight, I can tell you that much. But once I had done it a couple of times, you start to kind of learn. You're gathering more data on what's going to rent and how much it's going to rent for, what people are looking for, the decor, the furnished, unfurnished thing we talked about. So once I was going in with the intention of doing that, I could say, hey, this house is X. I know about how much it costs with all the repairs and maintenance. Then I could really start to break down what those profits would be and have a goal of, okay, if I get this property, I could rent it out immediately, furnished, and make this much. Once I have a 12-month lease on it, that's going to catapult me into getting the next one. So, Mickey, to your question, one point of advice I would have for people is, even though you may want to jump into the Airbnb space very quickly, a lot of the lenders aren't counting Airbnb income unless you have like a lot of years on your taxes. And in some cases, they're still not even counting that. So if I have a house right now on Airbnb that's, say it's making $5,000 a month, they would still look at that as a liability, which impedes your ability to get more loans, obviously. So in the beginning, I had to learn that the hard way too. I wasn't even getting approved for some loans, so we would say, all right, well, let's take this off of Airbnb, let's make it a long-term rental, and then it's going to show income instead of an outstanding debt every month. So that really helped me get the next one each time, and it was probably at a pace of like 1 or 2 a year, and then furnishing them, listing them, pictures, all that afterwards. But that's something I would definitely recommend early on is don't be too quick to do Airbnb. If you're still in the acquiring phase, it's going to allow you to get more loans.
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's something, the Airbnb and short-term rental is just, it's getting a lot of attention, and it's super profitable. But, like everything else, it looks great from the outside, and then you start digging into it, and it's a lot more complex than it looks. I know
Definitely.
one of the things you did early on was you used to just like travel on the weekends and Airbnb. I remember when you were doing that, and it was just like you couldn't believe how much money that you were making, and you're like, why wouldn't I travel every weekend? So it was, and seeing it from that lens, it makes perfect sense. But then you start trying to grow it, and it's a lot more complex.
Yeah, and you knew it's not going to last forever when the profits are like that. I knew that early on that, either if it's too good to be true, that sort of thing. So, either other investors are going to have their hand in it, or there's going to be more fees, which actually both happened. They've raised the fees so much in certain cities and states, really can eat into your profits. But, when something looks that good, there's a lot more people that want to get into it, a lot of wealthy people that want to get into it. A point I wanted to make about the long term is that so many landlords are putting their rentals, say they have a bunch of them like me or more, that kind of floods the Airbnb market. But it opens up an opportunity in the long term space because there's less of those out there. So when everybody looks at how good Airbnb is, which it is, I'm not saying it's not because it is great, but it opens up doors on the other side when those have been converted. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a very good point.
So hard to go wrong with real estate, though. One way or the other.
Right. You were a huge inspiration to me with all of your real estate ventures. I started looking into Airbnb because of you. And this was years ago. And I was like, Brandon's doing it. Why am I not doing this? Like, I've got to get in the game. And I started really trying to, do my very high level underwriting. And I started, the more I looked into Airbnb and single family rental, the more I started shying away from it because I saw a ton of risk for a new investor like myself years ago. I was looking at it as, oh my gosh, if this one property doesn't do what I'm saying it's supposed to do, then I've really shot myself in the foot. And I'm looking at years to recover from a mistake, and I don't have the experience. Like, how did you approach it from a risk standpoint? Because that I saw nothing but like risk when I looked into it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. That's very kind words. But when I got started out, you kind of alluded to it. This was about 10 years ago when I had that first townhouse. I used to list it for rent. I want to say it was around like $850 a night, and I had all my belongings in there. And Airbnb was different back then. And I would list it all the time, and if somebody rented it on a Friday, I would meet them at the front door, shake their hand, and hand them the keys, and just be like, "Enjoy, have fun." And obviously, you can't do that anymore. I don't think Airbnb wants that. I don't think I would want to rent that either. But that was kind of an easy way for me to dip my toes in and understand how to run the app. And like you said, it was risk-free because it was already somewhere I lived. So that's the easy way I always recommend people to start is if you're okay with it. It's tougher if you have a family, things like that. But if you're ever able to, if you have a vacation, you can lock all your things up. We can get into that later. But I think I mentioned this earlier. Like, once you have, it's definitely harder at the beginning. So you're right, Doug. Like, The first couple of ones, it's risky. You don't know you're doing, things are taking longer, so it is more of a risk. But once you get through those one or two, and I think this is kind of known in real estate as well, is that ball just starts to snowball. Once you're able to get a couple of them, your capital's up a little more. You're shortening up that process, things like that. So after I had done a couple, I mentioned earlier, I could kind of do the pencil test and get things down to a science to where I know exactly what I'm buying, how much it's going to rent for, what the rate is. I know the insurance better than what the lender is. I know how to estimate everything to where it's mitigating those risks because I feel really confident in what I'm going to make. So it's tougher when the rates are going crazy and the prices are crazy like we've had the last couple of years. But I still tell people just don't be afraid. It's never a bad time to buy a house because we've got different options we can do. I don't know. I think that's just a good way to get started is learning the app and renting your place. Anything you can do like that to just get started.
Yeah, you said that word afraid, and I think that's what holds a lot of people back is fear. But if you do what you said earlier and arm yourself with knowledge, then that should overcome the fear for most people. And I always say, be willing to take a risk, and even if you fail, and get out there and try again. But I know I've had some failures in some of my real estate ventures. Have you had any failures, and what were they about?
Well, honestly, Mickey, I've been pretty fortunate. Any of the failures I can list for you would be pretty minimal. A lot of that was just kind of like learning by fire as I started, and maybe getting some bad ratings on Airbnb, things like that. I could joke, someone would check in tomorrow and clog up the toilet, and we didn't have a plunger, and that's a huge miss, right? And that sounds really dumb, but when you're first starting out, there's so many things that you just got to learn. Again, you can go online and download a huge list of everything you need now. But back when I was doing it, that was something that was a big miss in the beginning. So have I had like a ton of millions of mini failures like that? But if I'm talking about any of the houses I bought, none of them have failed. I haven't had to like foreclose on any of them, if that's what you mean. But I always tell people to try and stay away from HOAs. The only properties I've ever sold were ones that were part of an HOA. Just because you're paying extra fees for more rules. I know in Tennessee, probably more properties are in communities that have HOAs. Every market's different. Tampa is pretty, I would call it hodgepodge. You'd have a nice house next to like what looks like a teardown. So it's a little bit easier to stay away from HOAs here. But a lot of HOAs don't allow you to do Airbnb anyway, so that takes that option off the table. So I had a condo that I loved. It's a waterfront condo down here. It was right next to the airport. It was beautiful, and I loved it, and I tried to keep it. And the HOAs, every time I went over there, I had the worst experience with their HOA. And you just don't know going in because you can't really vet an HOA. All you can do is look at the 900-page manual. And I remember I was trying to replace the couch in this beautiful condo, and the couch that was in there was a sleeper sofa because it was a one-bedroom. And the sleeper sofa was like 30 years old. I was like, I got to get this out of here. Why have they not replaced it? Order a new couch. And I found out that day that we couldn't use either of the elevators. They don't allow you to use the elevators for moving furniture. How would I have known this? So they told me if you want to replace furniture, you have to get a crane. I'm not joking, and put it through the window. So as I'm there, I've got the couch. I've got the couch guys. They've got it halfway in the elevator. They come out. They come run it out and stop me. And so I'm like, so I have to hire a crane, or I have to stick. That's why that couch was still in there for 30 years. It looked terrible, and that among other things with that one condo were just so frustrating. You couldn't really upgrade it. You couldn't do things without running through the HOA, on top of the other rules they had. And I still wouldn't call that one a failure. I ended up selling it like 6 months later and still made a good profit. But again, it was learning experiences. I try and stay away from HOAs and altogether, really.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I've had beach condos myself, and you go in with one HOA board, and a year later you got a different HOA board and some more new rules, and so it's hard to know what you're buying. So that's a risk too. And I mentioned two of mine that didn't do well, and that was really because the government changed the tax rules midstream. This was back in the 80s, and that made it very difficult to do anything. What are some of your methods to locate properties and evaluate the areas and then determine whether they're going to be profitable or not?
So to locate properties, I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. I have a realtor that I trust who's awesome, and I use Zillow constantly. So maybe a few tips is I have a realtor that compliments me in that he's good at the things I'm not good at. So he's good at contracts, he's good at negotiating, but I really find the properties because I'm sure anybody who has the Zillow app can relate. I'm just obsessive about it. I mean, I'm checking it all the time. In the Zillow app or maybe any other app you want to use, but probably Zillow, you can save a lot of searches for the exact criteria you want. So I get multiple emails every day, probably every hour, that say this one's pending or there's price drops on this, so I can kind of learn what's going on in the market around me. I'll go around saving $1 million houses, not that I'm going to buy them, but just to see if they've come down to 900, 800, and there's an opportunity to get them. I want to keep my eye on them. You can save different zip codes, the amount of bedrooms, everything you want, and get email alerts constantly. So really, it's me and just staying diligent and using the technology that's out there. And I know it may sound simple, but if you check your email like me religiously, like the house that we just went under contract on last week, I was at the house after I'd been on Zillow for 3 minutes. So I was out front after I'd been on for 3 minutes and was on the phone with my realtor. So I can find them and I can go and I can select them and see what I think is good and not good, and I just let him do the rest. So I think if you've got a realtor out there that you don't think is great, don't be afraid to move away and get somebody that is going to work for you and do things that maybe aren't in your skill set, because that's what I did. And I wanted to move away and kind of list my rentals myself. But for me and my business, having him on board is great. And then Mickey, you're asking about, I think, like, how do I make sure they're profitable? That kind of boils down to the pencil test. I think I wrote down an example here. If I look at a property that's, like I mentioned earlier, I know exactly what the taxes are going to be. I know roughly what the insurance is going to be. I know how much cleaning fees and the furniture is going to be for every property I get. So if I'm looking at it and the mortgage is around $2,500, and maybe I'm all in every month for around $4,500 a month, I want to make, my goal in an Airbnb property is to try and clear at least $2,000 a month. So if I'm breaking that down as I look at a property and the margins are smaller, that's going to be a little bit risky, especially if you have a high mortgage on it. It may be something you want to pass on. And you got to have everything in there. If there's an HOA fee, put that in, because sometimes you forget. If you forget any of that, your margins are tiny. So using that example, if 4,500 you're all in, I can look at the average occupancy based on my data and my history. But maybe if someone's getting started, you can actually just get on Airbnb and research a lot of that yourself. I know there's a good website, AirDNA, that could break down potential rental, income, things like that. So definitely recommend you doing that, especially if you're just getting started out. And so my average occupancy is around 57%, which in a month that's 30 days, it's about 17 days. So if I'll know the average, weekends are going to be more, weekdays will be less. But let's say I average that out at like $500 a night, times 17 days was $8,500. So you're looking at a profit of about $4,000 a month. And if I can crunch the numbers, and that's what I'm seeing back, that's a win all day long. So I'll try and put as little as I can put down. If I've got to put 20% to get the house and start cash flowing it immediately.
That's awesome.
Sounds great.
So you're clearly still buying. You're about to close on another property. So in the current economic conditions, you're still seeing opportunity. You're still looking. What is your forecast on what is to come?
Well, I'm definitely always still looking. It is definitely a tougher time though as well. So I actually haven't bought anything since last February of 2022. So this is the longest lull. So I have been sitting on the sidelines as well. But the best technique I'm trying to put in, I guess, is if the rates are staying high and they keep building these houses, and I'm just speaking for my market, but it's probably similar everywhere. As long as the supply keeps going up and the rates are still very high, then these prices on the actual house can take a dip. And then I heard this in one of the podcasts or YouTubes, and some of my research has said, marry the house, but date the rate. So you're going to marry that house and that loan for 30 years, and your rate is going to change. The rates change every day. So if you're able to get another rate, a better rate in a year or two, you shouldn't base what you're buying, the house you're buying, on that rate. And I think that's easier to do a little bit in the investing world, and people look at it differently when they're buying for themselves. But so this purchase we were doing last week, if the rates they're over 7%, there's not a ton of buyers at the doorstep. So I'm able to get that price for a little bit lower. Now, do I like the rate? No, of course not. And my payment's going to be a little bit higher, but I've got a plan for it, and I've crunched those numbers. If I can get this rate in the fives, even in the fives, in the next couple of years, this ends up being a really profitable long-term or Airbnb. So I'll go in there myself. I'll put in a pool, put in some high-end upgrades, and a strategy I did a long time ago was me moving in. I'm going to do that again. So I'll be moving into this property. And so that's the opportunity I see, is if the rates are really high, people aren't buying as much. So you can try and get the price down or some seller concessions. Get something from the seller, like get your closing costs, get some concessions to buy the rate down. When that supply's pumped up, they're willing to play ball a little bit more, and you can secure a house. Just, get more properties, get the house. Worry about the rate and the cash flow later. Because, you don't want to be underwater, of course, but as long as you can rent it out for at least what your mortgage is right now, I think that's a good buy. And then, just hold it until things get... the rental rates are going up here like crazy anyway, but I don't want to depend on that because they could always go back down. So if I could just get in the door on one of them and worry about refinancing later, that's my strategy right now.
Gotcha. And so do you also typically move in, when you purchase a house, you move in as your primary residence? Is that typically what you try to do?
So I did
that as an investment property?
Well, so in the beginning I did that, not even on purpose.
Right.
And then probably, 6 or 7 in the middle were bought as investment properties. And then I've been in the current house I'm in now, which we've done a lot of work to. We love it. We know what it can make. So as much as I want to sit at the pool, I see dollar signs on Airbnb. So I'm like, hey, let's move out of this one. We'll rent this one. We'll do the same thing at the next one. We'll live there for, who knows how long. We could be there for 4 or 5 years. We could be there for a few years, but you just never know. So to answer your question, it was a strategy kind of in the beginning, and then I was buying them to not have to move, and now I'm like, hey, we've been here for a long time. Let's move into a new one and take advantage of it. Another thing I'd say is, no one's going to fix up a house or renovate it like you when you live there. Like when you're living in it, you're going to put all the little touches because you're actually living in the house. You realize, we could use this here. The pool would be better this way. And we really make them like top notch from being a part of it. Making it a home, I guess you could say, if that sounds cheesy, instead of a house. But I think it's really worked over the years, and the tenants and how they do an Airbnb kind of reflects that.
A minute ago, you were talking about negotiating the price and the terms, and I always like to think of those as two separate entities that a lot of times sellers are not going to come off the price, but they will negotiate the terms, and that applies to a lot more than real estate, of course. And that's just always something for everyone to think about. I got a question.
Yeah.
Where do you see the Airbnb market going over the next 5 or 10 years?
That's a good question. It's tough to answer, honestly, because I think it's going to be different everywhere. I think, and Mickey, I think you mentioned this earlier too about your condos you had, and they maybe had changed some laws. But Airbnb were always at the mercy of, city ordinances and things like that. So where I'm at, we live about 30 minutes away from St. Petersburg, and St. Petersburg does not allow Airbnb, short-term rentals. So in Tampa, overnight they could say, hey, we don't allow, we want to help out the hotels. Who knows why? But if they just pass the law, they don't want to allow you to do short-term rentals anymore. You're going to have a whole lot of short-term rentals on the market that are trying to go long-term or for sale. So I don't see that happening anytime soon, but people have to realize what they're getting into is don't invest in something that's, there's just a lot to think about when you're getting something as a short-term rental, that being one of them. So when you ask me the future of it, I think the future is bright. I know we've talked about like the short-term rental fund. When me as an investor, when I look at the competition out there, I watched you guys' webinar with TechVestor, which was great. I sent it to a few of my friends, so hopefully you can add the link on here above my head. But that thing was awesome, and it was, I've heard a lot of those short-term rental funds and looked into them. I think I've sent you some of them as well. But this one definitely looked like the most aggressive payouts. But the future I see is a lot more of those short-term rental funds. They're going to be weeding out the mom and pops that Seif, I believe, was from TechVestor, that he was referring to. Is the gap is becoming larger. So you've got the mom and pops that have the IKEA furniture in their garage, and you used to have a lot of kind of nice ones. And then what I would consider mine is like a higher end, really well run, really well done. Price is high. I think with a lot of investors getting in and just smart people that have a lot of money that are getting in the game, I think that they're going to weed a lot of those mom and pop ones out. But I think as a consumer, if I'm renting something, I'm going to Chicago this weekend, if I stay in an Airbnb that once I show up, if it looks terrible, they don't need to be on Airbnb. And if I'm going somewhere like the TechVestor runs, I know no matter what, it's going to look great. It's going to be clean. I'm going to be able to get in touch with somebody 24/7. So I look at that as my competition as well. But I do see it as a big part of the future of Airbnb, because when the getting was good, we knew it wasn't going to stay that good for that long. Obviously, other people are going to want to invest in Airbnb in short-term rentals when the returns are so good. So I don't think a lot of the city ordinances are as big of a deal, but I think people didn't know that when they're getting into it. If they're going to put their life savings into something they're investing in, make sure they know what city they're in and the possibilities, basically. But I see more of these short-term rental funds growing and just being an alternative to hotels for big groups, really. And they're just too well run. And, like I've mentioned to you over the phone, I want to get into the short-term rental funds because I think it's a learning experience for me as well as it is lucrative. And then continue to run mine, what considered mom and pop, I guess. But and then hopefully I can separate myself from all those others as well. You know what I mean? And not get weeded out by the ones that are coming in and doing it right.
Well, from my perspective, it seems like the smaller, like you said, if you're doing a larger scale that can host groups versus a 2-bedroom or something that would be comparable to a hotel. I know for myself, traveling, I look at, okay, I'm going to stay at an Airbnb, and then you start pricing it out, and you realize with all the fees and everything, you're like, I'll just go stay at a hotel. It's like I can stay at a nice hotel, not have to worry about cleaning up after myself for a cheaper price, and probably get a breakfast included in it. And it's like you go to an Airbnb and you gotta, you gotta pay a cleaning fee, you gotta pay all these other fees associated, and it blows the price up. And I think that's where a huge the market's flooded for Airbnbs in that category, and the prices outweigh what a hotel is, and they're not unique and they're nothing special, and it's just sort of like, why would I do that? I think you're going to see the hotels start coming back in that category, as far as like just one person or a couple of people for a couple of nights.
I agree. Yeah, it's I've mentioned this before, but it's when I'm looking for a house, it's 4 bedrooms or more, basically. Easiest way to say it. I'm trying to put a body of water in there, a pool or a hot tub, 4 more bedrooms, because I don't want to compete with a hotel because of everything you said. And depending on the city, the fees have gone up a lot here. The fees are pretty expensive. I even feel bad for some of the guests. It's just, what I get compared to what they're paying is a big difference. So we try and live in that 4 bedrooms, 5 bedroom space, because just like you, Doug, if I'm going out of town, my girlfriend and I, we're getting a hotel that's just me and her because it's too easy. But we do go on trips with big groups, big couples and stuff, and it's always Airbnb. Makes the experience so much better. But
I agree. It's like, but yeah, it's like if you focus on creating a destination for people, then people want to stay there. So, and I think that's exactly what you alluded to, or what you were saying is, hey, you want 4 more bedrooms and you want water somewhere. So it's like, I think that's a great model to have, and I think that those will, continue to be profitable in the future. I think there's always going to be a place for those. Give us some advice for someone starting out, and we wanted to hear. You have 3 ways to start earning Airbnb income now. So fill us in on a little bit of advice and ways people can get started today.
Okay. So I guess to start with just advice for someone starting out, right, before the Airbnb.
Yeah.
Okay. First things first, I'd talk with a lender. And so that's all my friends to do. They're always looking at houses every day, and they haven't talked to their lender yet. So if you're serious about getting in the game, you talk to your lender, you find out what you can get approved for, get them all the documentation. So it's fine to be sitting on the sidelines, but you need to know what you're approved for. You need to know how much money, if you don't have a W-2, if you have a side hustle like you guys have, you've got to be able to prove that income. And sometimes you think you could be approved for a little bit more than you're going to get approved for. So talk to a lender is one. Like I mentioned earlier, just jump in, both feet into the deep end on YouTube or podcast, and you cannot listen to too many of them. Like I said earlier, I wish I would have done that earlier in my career, and I'm still learning stuff right now. I mean, I'm downstairs yesterday watching YouTube video after YouTube video, and if I pick up one new thing that I didn't know yesterday, it'll save me a bunch of time and probably some money. So dive in on YouTube. There's so much free stuff. Listen to podcasts like this. I know I'll be listening to more of these. And it's all free, and it's too good to be true. So you got to jump in. And then the third thing would be researching your competition on Airbnb. So if you don't have an Airbnb, whatever, you just look at it as you're a traveler and see what's out there. If you see a lot of 3 bedrooms that are renting for $50 a night, maybe that's not an area you want to buy in. Maybe that's not an area you want to look in. Just kind of know what competition's out there before you just look at buying something and want to turn it into an Airbnb. So talk with your lender, know what you can buy, watch tons of YouTube videos so you can get as much information as possible, drink their fire hose, and then get on Airbnb and poker. It's fun. You're looking at houses down the street. You're looking at houses, if you're in Memphis, look downtown, or like Mickey, he's got all those waterfront condos. Check those out and see what they're renting for. Because, if you can't buy the house and rent them out for around the same price, it's probably not a good idea. So 3 quick things there. And then ways that they can start making Airbnb money today. It's just the stuff I mentioned that I did and it worked out is if you've got a house now and you're able to, rent out a spare bedroom. If you've got a unit over your garage, start renting it out. You learn the app, you learn the ins and outs, you make mistakes, you learn you need a plunger, things like that. It's not going to be super profitable, but it's a really good way to learn. as opposed to when you get a house that's 4 bedrooms and you want it to be perfect and it's going to be on there, and then it's a bigger mistake because you got a party of 10 people. So, it's a good way to dip your toes in. Just rent a spare bedroom. Another way to do it is me and Doug, we joked about this, is how I used to rent out my entire home. To some people, this is impossible. It may not sound ideal, but a strategy that I did a long time ago is just if you have some extra closets in your house, or if you even have a bathroom closet, you put a lock on those, put up all your personal belongings. You make beautiful pictures of your house, list it on Airbnb, have it blocked by default, so obviously no one's going to book it until you leave town. And Doug, say you and Brittany are going to Italy for 2 weeks, and you put your house on Airbnb for 2 weeks. And we went to Indonesia and Singapore last year for 5 weeks, and rented ours out for almost like $10,000. So we still do that now, and it's a great way for people to start it. If you live somewhere, it's a great way to just start saving up money. If you want to put it towards a house, you're not able to. Start renting out your house. Sometimes you got to make a little sacrifice here or there, but start renting it out, saving that money up. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is what we were talking about earlier. A really good way to get your feet in without having to take on all the risks and all the work of Airbnb, because it's a ton of work, is these short-term rental funds. So if you've got a little bit of money, maybe not enough to put 20% down on a house, but you've got something you want to put into a short-term rental fund. And Doug and Mickey, you can talk more about this. This is your podcast, but I plan on investing in them, and I know some of my friends plan on investing in them. It's a truly passive way of getting into the Airbnb and the short-term rental game. As some real estate is considered, passive and some's non-passive, but investing in these funds really, you're not lifting a finger, you're not cleaning any toilets, calling any handyman, and you can get some great returns and stuff. So I definitely strongly recommend those for anybody who's looking to get in the game.
Sounds good. Brandon, would you tell our audience how everyone can get in touch with you if they're interested in renting one of your properties or need to reach you for anything, please?
Definitely. But probably the easiest way is just on Instagram or under Buck Realty LLC. Just shoot us a DM, or my email is buckrealtyllc@gmail.com. So, and I'm on it every day. So.
For sure.
But yeah, thank you guys for having me. This is really cool. I can't wait to watch some more of these, some more podcasts, some more webinars. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Brandon. Thanks for coming on, and good luck with everything you have coming up.
Thank you, man.
Thanks, Mickey. Thank you, Brandon, for sharing your knowledge with us and with our audience. And we want to ask everyone out there to help us help you find your passive income superpower.
Thank you for watching the Passive Income Power Podcast. We hope you gained wealth-building insights. I will ask you to do 3 things to help us serve you best. Go to our website at 2dinvestments.com, click on Investors Club, and fill out the basic information to have timely access to new offerings. 2, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And 3, feel free to set up a call with Doug or Mickey through our website. We would love to help you find your personal superpower.